Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're watching or listening to this. I'm the Shredder. The opinions I'm about to express, as always, are my own. And this is a trigger warning before I go any further with this video, or delve into the meat of it at least. I will be discussing topics of exploitation of children, sexual assault, molestation, and this is your warning. If you are upset by that for whatever reason at all, please do not watch any further. Also, before I get into the main subject, this is it is a bit of a dark side subject. Although normally I talk about Dark Side of the Ring, but this was a documentary series that recently came out. It was called um, Quiet on Set: The Dark Side of Kids TV, and the main focus of it was Dan Schneider. And I'm coming from this from a little bit of a different perspective than some other YouTubers on here, for the simple reason that I did not really grow up with Dan Schneider's programming in my life. I mean, I was born in 1987. Um, by the time Dan Schneider's programming started to come out, if I remember correctly, the one program that he was heavily involved with that I did watch growing up was Keenan and Kel. But as the years progressed, by the time the Amanda Show came out in 1999, I'd have been 12 years old. I had moved on to things like Beavis and Butthead and South Park, and I was watching sketch comedy shows on the BBC and a whole lot of classic British comedies as well, and also some political satire too. But at that point, again, Schneider's programming didn't appeal to me, and by the time Drake and Josh came out, I would have been 17. So it wasn't. I wasn't the demographic for that. I did know it existed. I did know of his company, Schneider's Bakery, because I had younger siblings who would watch it on TV. But again, it wasn't my cup of tea. So I am not somebody who's coming from this from a perspective of how Schneider's programming, greatly impacted my childhood. It didn't. So, um, with that in mind, I'd like to now get into the whole meat of the argument and discuss the documentary that came out and the fallout from it too. So, the documentary series Quiet on Set: The Dark Side of Kids TV has been beyond disturbing, and that's putting it mildly. The foot fetish of Dan Schneider leaking into his programming, that's become well known in recent years due to a lot of video essays and columns retroactively looking at his work and compiling a lot of evidence for it. There was even a case where one of the shows he worked on, Sam and Cat, they asked on Twitter for kids to send in pictures of their feet. And that's disturbing, the fact that that tweet is even still up on their account more than 10 years later. And he's unfortunately unlikely to ever be prosecuted for basically using children to satisfy his sexual fetishes. However, he has tried to do the whole YouTube apology route, where he did a softball interview with a former child actor that he previously worked with, and the only things missing really were a dog for him to pet or a ukulele. Schneider, during his interview, he attempted to apologize for making anyone feel uncomfortable. The documentary, meanwhile, covered a catalogue of sexist abuse toward female writers, which included forcing two writers to split the salary of one male writer to work on The Amanda Show, berating them in front of other writers over how women were not funny and that there were no good female writers, making them perform various degrading acts for his amusement, such as getting one to guzzle 2 pints worth of ice cream for $300, which he never paid up on, and having one give a pitch while she was bent over and pretending she was being sodomized by a male writer. Now, of course, Schneider has attempted to justify splitting the salary between two writers who just happened to be the female ones, saying that it was a common practice in television and that they had a free choice to say yes or no to it, depending on how badly they wanted to work in TV. The Writers Guild of America might have some things to say in response to this because uh, they informed one of the two writers that salary splits are not allowed. It's against their rules. And what Dan Schneider did was a violation of their rights. And that last one in particular, the getting a writer to do a pitch while bent over and pretending she was being sodomized, it ties into just how creepy Schneider was towards young female cast members, because that took place while he was in a hot tub with a 15-year-old Amanda Bynes. Bynes was in a bathing suit. Schneider got in and joined her fully clothed. And there's been multiple instances reported over the years of Dan Schneider getting hands-on and massaging the shoulders and backs of young female talent, especially before and after scenes where they would be in swimsuits or bikinis or crop tops. And the documentary also explored just how he would personally work with Amanda Bynes long into the night, rather than letting her go and do her schoolwork with the other child actors involved in the production of that show. Schneider was also given the opportunity in his YouTube bid for pity to address how some of the jokes have not aged well, and that is putting it way too mildly. So, while it was not mentioned specifically in his YouTube video, there were a lot of jokes of a sexualized nature in Dan Schneider's productions, and the most infamous were probably his numerous jokes sexualizing a then underage Ariana Grande. Now, I am not going to put those clips on this video. I know they're up on YouTube. I am not going to be putting them on here. Sorry, I have no intention at all of, perpetuating the sexualization of a minor. But it included things like her trying to squeeze juice out of a potato and saying, "Come on, give up the juice," being sprayed with water guns by a group of guys and then yelling about the water being cold while she was in a tiny top and shorts, sucking her own foot, deep throating her finger. Um, there was her being bathed by other people. There was, I think, there was a questionable shot too where she was lying upside down in a bed trying to drink water, and it looked like it looked like a cum shot. And that's not the only time this has happened. I mean, it happened very, very frequently with Grandy. But the documentary also shows a young Jamie Lynn Spears, who again was a minor, taking a blast of a white glue-like substance to the face. And Schneider has said he never intended for any of his jokes to cause upset or discomfort. And in cases where they make people uncomfortable to look back at them, then they should just be cut out of his shows because he wants his shows to be enjoyed by everyone. I would argue, given the blatant and repeated sexualization of kids, including to seemingly satisfy the man's own personal fetishes, Nickelodeon would be best to just bury his shows entirely. And yeah, while there are some who would cry censorship, I'll remind you of two things. First is that old shows have been pulled completely when something horrible has emerged regarding a main staple of the programming. I mean, reruns of The Cosby Show, for example, they were taken off the air following the sexual assault cases against Bill Cosby. It's also why here in the UK, you don't see repeats of shows starring Rolf Harris or Jimmy Savile or the long-running ITV daytime staple that was the Jeremy Kyle Show after a guest killed themselves. Second is that you would literally be arguing that it is censorship to remove blatant sexualization of minors. What in the actual fuck is wrong with you if you think it's appropriate to keep Schneider's productions on the air, either on Nickelodeon or through syndication? Schneider was also hit with credible accusations of racism and gender discrimination on the productions of his show as well, but he doesn't really go on to address those beyond apologising for the way I behaved. Other things that went on at Nickelodeon that the documentary has covered, they've included the sexual abuse of a child actor by a dialogue coach named Brian Peck. So Peck was arrested in 2003. He was charged with, I think it was 11 counts in relation to sexual assault of a minor. The name of the child actor was unknown for the better part of 2 decades. I mean, the child actor was only listed in the court documents as John Doe. However, during the course of this documentary, Drake Bell from Drake and Josh, he's the one who actually came forward and revealed that he was the John Doe. So it was an open and shut case when it came to Brian Peck. I mean, the LAPD had him banged to rights, where they wiretapped the phone conversation where Drake had confronted him over what he'd done, and Brian Peck confessed to it. And he pleaded no contest to two of the counts he was up on, and they were performing a lewd act with a 14 or 15-year-old and oral capitulation of someone under the age of 16. And he wound up sentenced to just 16 months in prison for this, which, well, let's be honest, was far too fucking lenient. The worst part, though, is, well, maybe not the worst part, but worse still was the fact that Peck had 41 letters seeking leniency submitted on his behalf from co-workers at Nickelodeon and other celebrities. Now, these included asking the judge to reduce the sentence to probation rather than any time behind bars, on the grounds that Peck was deeply remorseful and he would have to live with the shame of what he had done, and that Peck himself was the real victim at the end of the day. And these letters came from the likes of James Marsden. There was Drake Bell's co-star on the Amanda Show, Taron Killam. On the Boy Meets World stars, Will Friedle and Ryder Strong. It was really similar to the case, I think it was the end of last year, where Mila Kunis and Ashton Kutcher had sent letters requesting leniency for Danny Masterton after he'd been found guilty of rape. So Friedel and Strong, they tried to preempt the revelation that they had sent letters on their podcast, Pod Meets World, and they claimed that they had been manipulated by Brian Peck. It didn't wash with a lot of people, and they were slammed in particular by Alexis Nicholas, who was the star of a show called Zoe 101, and she was also in the Quiet on Set documentary. And she posted to Instagram, "You cared more about Hollywood, Pizzagate, and Boy Meets World than a child that was molested by someone you defended and never apologized to." And Drake Bell has also commented on this. So he posted a comment on a now deleted post that was attempting to defend both Friedel and Strong. And he said, "Will was 27 years old and Brian told him what he did. Many people turned away and said, no, I won't write a letter, but Friedel and Strong did." He continued, "Will was not manipulated. Brian admitted it to him and he wrote the letter anyway. Then he worked with me on many, many episodes of Spider-Man years later and never said a word to me about it. This is because they were told their letters are going to be made public. Everyone thought the letters would be sealed forever and no one would ever see them. This is their publicist telling them how to get ahead of the story." And Drake Bell actually wound up replying to another comment that claimed that Ryder Strong was a minor when he submitted his letter to the judge, and he defiantly said, "No, he wasn't. Ryder was 24 when he wrote that letter and was told by Brian what he did. He wrote the letter anyway." And before I go any further, Drake Bell, of course, he would go on to commit offences against a minor himself after he was accused of engaging in inappropriate behaviour with 15-year-olds by his ex-girlfriend. I think this was in 2020. He was arrested the following year on charges of attempted endangering of children and disseminating harmful material to juveniles. In other words, he'd been sending inappropriate text messages to what was a 15-year-old girl at the time. This supposedly happened in the run-up to a concert he performed in Ohio in 2017 and continued afterwards. And Bell was 31 years old at the time. So Bell initially maintained his innocence, but he then later changed his plea to guilty on both charges. And he didn't go to prison for that. He got 2 years of probation and 200 hours of community service. And his victim during the hearing described Bell as the epitome of evil. And a month after his guilty plea, she even made a public appearance where she accused him of sexually assaulting her on top of the charges that were filed against him. Now, the revelations about Drake Bell being a victim of sexual assault as a minor himself, they don't in any way excuse his own sexual crimes later in life against another minor. It's not up to anyone other than Drake Bell's own accuser, his own victim, if he's deserving of any kind of forgiveness, or at least understanding over what he did. Although Bell is now suggesting that he wants to break the cycle of abuse in Hollywood, and unfortunately there is a statistical probability that his own experience of being sexually abused might have actually played a part in his own crimes, because there's studies out there that suggest it's anywhere between 1 in 3 and 1 in 4 people who have been sexually assaulted as children wind up going on to abuse children themselves. But what is really messed up is that even after Brian Peck spent 16 months in prison for sexual assault of a minor, he wound up being hired by Disney. And this was almost immediately after he'd been released from jail. And he wound up working on The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody. And at the time, the two stars of that show, they'd have been, 13 or 14 years old. I mean, thankfully, Brian Peck did never ever get to the set. He was credited as providing the voice for a talking mirror in 3 episodes, but when people within Disney realized that he was a convicted and registered sex offender, Peck was fired. His credits were also scrubbed from the show, and I think the episodes he'd worked on, they redubbed the audio for his part. But being a registered sex offender hasn't been enough to have Brian Peck completely blackballed from the entertainment industry. He has got acting and production credits to his name right up until the year 2018. And this includes an uncredited role in another Disney production, the movie Bedtime Stories in 2008. Uh, Brian Peck was also revealed in the documentary to have been a fan and pen pal of the infamous serial killer John Wayne Gacy. He had a signed painting of a clown by him hanging on his wall next to a Planet of the Apes shrine. And that's the same John Wayne Gacy who'd been charged twice and sentenced once over sexually assaulting teenage boys. In the end, went on to rape and murder at least 33 young men. 12 of the identified victims were between the ages of 14 and 17. Yeah, what a great guy to have involved in the production of your children's TV shows. Quiet on Set also spotlighted the case of Jason Handy, who worked in the production of The Amanda Show. He exchanged email addresses and phone numbers with cast members and parents who they thought it was completely innocent and a great way for their kids, who might only be in an episode or even just a small handful of them, to establish a network connection for possible future work. And at least one of these teenage girls, however, they received emails that eventually turned graphic, including Handy sending an image of himself masturbating. Handy was not reported to the police by the girl's mother when she was tipped off about this because, as she explained in the documentary, she was worried that she would be the one blamed for this and vilified as a bad parent for letting her daughter talk to an adult man in the first place. But despite this, Jason Handy was eventually caught and he was arrested. Police searched his home in 2003. They found over 10,000 images of child pornography and items he had acquired from underage girls and kept in Ziploc bags, which included a pair of girls' underwear. And he also, in his own diaries, referred to himself as a pedophile. Now, he pleaded no contest to two of the felony charges that were against him, and he only got 6 years. And despite 10,000 images of child porn and having all this stuff from underage girls, he only got 6 years in prison. But he also was registered as a sex offender. He was then arrested again in 2014 for more crimes against minors. But what is probably more disturbing than the documentary, for me at least, has been people online who have been prepared to defend Dan Schneider and accept his YouTube apology as being sincere. Look, the man blatantly sexualized children and requested feet photos from teenagers, and he saw nothing wrong with it. And only now, when a documentary has exposed it to a much wider audience than an online column or a YouTube video essay would have, he's now decided to take ownership of his behavior and apologize for his actions. Now, if you want someone to explain how Jimmy Savile got away with everything he did all those years ago, then go grab some posts from social media of people right now defending Dan Schneider, and that will tell you everything you need to know. Now, apparently, he didn't think it might be proper to do a retrospective on his own behavior and apologize after, say, 2019 when Nickelodeon cut ties with him. Because Nickelodeon had an internal investigation they conducted into allegations about his conduct, and they found he was known to lose his temper and bully cast and crew, including in some cases where prominent child actors, they had to be written out of shows when the actors just decided to quit after the season had wrapped up. Now, thankfully, most people are just not swallowing Dan Schneider's half-baked attempt at self-pity. His video is currently sitting with it's less than 10,000 likes as I'm recording this and over 112,000 dislikes. And I can't remember the last time I saw a video that heavily ratioed. But it was bad enough that he turned off the comments. Now, I've got absolutely no clue how things will progress from here. My best guess probably would be that Nickelodeon and Disney will announce some improved safeguarding of children working under their banner, maybe a few other networks as well. There might be a few settlements and NDAs with some of the child actors who were most impacted by what went on. Who knows, potentially, maybe the aftermath of this documentary will see a class action lawsuit against Dan Schneider. The man himself, though, I mean, he should be persona non grata and allowed nowhere near a production set for the rest of his life. But unfortunately, as Quiet on the Set has shown, registered sex offenders can be hired immediately after coming out of prison to work on Disney projects and still have careers in the industry for nearly 2 decades afterwards. So, unfortunately, it's rather likely that Schneider's name will continue to be attached to projects for many years to come. But hopefully, at the very, very least, it'll cause network executives to pay closer attention to what he's actually doing and not greenlight some of the shots of children that are very, very questionable and most likely used for his own personal sexual fetishes. But we shall see what happens. I'm the Shredder. That's my opinion.